Please.
Taoiseach, for almost a year now, all of your speeches about the economy are accompanied by a little catchphrase along the lines, as we approach full employment, our emphasis now has to be on good jobs, jobs that pay the bills, that allow people to aspire to home ownership and a pension where they can plan for the future. Now, obviously someone told you this was a great one-liner because you've been repeating it ad nauseum for almost a year. But you know what? The truth is, it means actually nothing. Because behind the figures that you boast about, there actually lurks a dark underworld, a battlefield of an almighty assault on the working conditions of men and particularly women in this country. And this week marks its escalation, with a number of industrial disputes brought about as a result of brute intransigence by profitable companies refusing to negotiate with unions or deal with the industrial relations machinery of the state. Actually, it's becoming quite a trend. Firstly, we have Lloyd's Pharmacy, the largest pharmacy chain in the country, 800 staff, 92% of the women, owned by a multi-billion US pharma giant. This company is a modern on the waterfront with no guaranteed hours. You can be brought into work any day at any time. If you're sick, tough, they won't pay you, forcing many low-paid workers into work sick in a job where they interface with sick people. You couldn't make it up. Since February 2017, the company has refused to negotiate with Mandate and is now blatantly ignoring a Labour Court recommendation. Of course, it doesn't have any problems at all in accepting the state when it comes to putting their hand out for the significant HSE community contracts that they profit from. Meanwhile, in your own neck of the woods, another group of workers being forced to take action on Thursday are the Ryanair pilots. And we've had the irony of the company which wrote the manual on blackmail and bullying, accusing Ryanair pilots of bullying. Seriously? For the simple demand that they might have a master seniority list, something which would cost the company nothing but would provide them with a transparent mechanism for dealing with base transfers, command upgrades, holidays and the like, which have a major impact on family life. But of course Ryanair want to keep it so they can continue to bully their staff. Taoiseach, as a former Minister for Transport, you know well the root cause of this dispute. Precarious employment contracts being used to deny pilots and cabin crew basic employment rights such as unfair dismissal and even maternity leave. We are unique in Ireland in facilitating such employment contracts, and it's about time you started to deal with it rather than talking about it. We're becoming infamous as a flag of convenience for social dumping. So what I want to know is, what are you doing against the backdrop of employers abandoning the voluntary industrial relations system? What are you doing to ensure that workers have access to collective bargaining and also to have a right to have their employment conditions protected?
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks very much, Deputy. With regard to first of all, I'm delighted you're reading my speeches. Often I need to say the same things many times before anyone picks up on them, and I'm delighted you are reading my speeches. Nobody told me it was a great one-liner. I wrote that one myself, and I wrote it because I believe it. You are always your best. You're always your own best speechwriter. To mention some other, to pick up on some of the points that the Deputy raised. Let's look at the facts here. These are CSO statistics. Unemployment was 16% when people trusted us, Fine Gael, the Independent Alliance and Independents, to manage the country's economy, or at least it peaked at 16% back in 2012. Rather, it's now down. It's now down at 5%. Long-term unemployment is 2%. For the last year or so, the number of full-time jobs is increasing. The number of part-time jobs is going down. We heard from the left consistent arguments that people were drifting into part-time work. The facts say otherwise. Part-time work is going down. Full-time work is going up. And the percentage of people, the proportion of people in self-employment as a proportion of the entire workforce is stable. So this idea that more and more people are being pushed into self-employment doesn't stand up. The proportion of people in self-employment is much as it was many years ago. To answer your question, what are we doing? You'll be aware that workers' rights legislation, employment legislation, is currently going through the Houses. Minister Doherty is bringing that legislation through. It deals with issues such as zero-hour contracts, banded hours. That legislation is going through the Dáil, and I hope that people will cooperate with Minister Doherty in getting that through before the recess this week. Secondly, at Cabinet Subcommittee yesterday, we signed off on the straw man proposal, the draft proposal for auto-enrolment. We have an enormous inequality in Irish society at the moment, where 2/3 of people in the private sector have no pension provision other than the state pension. People in the public sector, generally speaking, have good pensions, guaranteed pensions. 2/3 of people working in the private sector have no pension provision other than the state pension. And we signed off yesterday on the proposals that we're making to change that by enrolling everyone automatically in a pension scheme, everyone over the age of 23 automatically in a pension scheme, a top-up pension that they can add to their state pension, with the requirement that the employer contributes as well as the person who will benefit in the end, and the state also making a contribution too. And I look forward to Minister Doherty producing that, getting agreement on it, getting legislation done so we can introduce it in 21 or 22. In terms of the specific industrial relations issues that you raise, I would strongly encourage, as I always do, both sides, the unions and employers, to make use of the Workplace Relations Commission. We have a state body, we have a government body that stands ready to intervene and to help resolve these disputes. And I would ask both sides, unions and employers, to engage with the WRC, who are more than willing, capable and qualified to help broker a solution in the interest of citizens.
Deputy Daly.
Taoiseach, I have no problem with you repeating your own sound bites if they are yours as much as you like, whatever you're into yourself. But you see, a sound bite doesn't put food on the table. And the statistics would show, as Social Justice Ireland did earlier in the year, that actually as the economy has recovered, more people at work are in poverty. Over 100,000 workers at work are in poverty because of zero-hour contracts, because of precarious contracts of employment. That was the issue that I asked you. The Labour Court recovered almost 2 million in unpaid wages last year from vulnerable women workers in particular. And talking about new legislation is good. We welcome the new legislation. But the point that you're missing is that it's not enough. When employers out there are deliberately ignoring the industrial relations machinery of the state. And in the example of Lloyd's Pharmacy, for example, why aren't you, as the leader of this country, saying that anybody who does business with this government, in the HSE or otherwise, a minimum condition should be that they treat their workers fairly, that they don't have zero-hour contracts, and that they adhere to the principles of equality. We should be doing ethical business. If you put in clauses like that in our state contracts, I could guarantee you would do more for the working conditions of people in this state than any other measure that you possibly could. And it's a little bit ironic that we talk about measures like constitutional changes to the women in the home clause and so on, if we're ignoring in particular the areas where women work, where the amount of women are exploited because of the failure to recognise unions. And do you know what Lloyds do? They recognise a union for their male workers in the distribution depots where wages are good, but not for the women. So people don't want your sound bites of your talk. They'd like to see Deputy. A little bit of action on some of this stuff.
To conclude, please.
I think you're absolutely right, Deputy. Sound bites don't put food on the table. Jobs do. And we have more people at work in Ireland than ever in our history. Almost 2.3 million people now at work in Ireland. And for those in low-paid jobs with families, the working family payment, and we've improved the working family payment just this year, ensures that people who are in work, who do 19 hours work or more every week, who have children, are kept out of poverty. And that's why we have the working family payment, to ensure that. The CSO is not an NGO, it's not a lobby group, it produces official statistics, and the CSO statistics show that poverty in Ireland is now falling, deprivation in Ireland is now falling, inequality and income inequality is narrowing, and I think those things should be welcomed. But I absolutely acknowledge that we have more to do. There is always more work to do, and we intend to do that work by continuing to build employment in Ireland, continuing to increase wages and improve incomes, continuing to give more people their money back through reductions in taxation, by reducing the cost of accessing public services like childcare, like healthcare, for example, and by putting through the kind of legislation that Minister Doherty is bringing through at the moment to enhance people's workers' rights, to ban zero-hour contracts in almost all circumstances, to introduce banded hours. All of those things are very much part of the government's programme to improve living standards, and I would ask the opposition to cooperate with the government in getting that legislation through.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. That concludes